Issuing a notice to tenant to remove pets. Being a landlord is not always easy. There are things that can be hard but are necessary, such as increasing rent, evictions, or sending notices to tenants to remove their loving, beautiful pets. As you can imagine, it is very common for tenants to react negatively to this kind of notice because pets are typically part of the family. For this reason, it's important that landlords be careful with how they go about an unauthorized pet lease violation. In this video, we go over the process involved in sending a notice to tenant to remove pets, and as a special gift for you, we provide a link with a description with a free template that you can use with your tenants. You can get it before or after you hit the like and subscribe button. A notice to tenant to remove pets. An unauthorized pet violation simply means that the tenant has gone against the rules outlined in the lease agreement and has kept a pet in the property. When property managers find out, the course of action that is taken can depend on a lot of factors, like the kind of pet, the pet policy in the agreement, local laws, and state laws. Before sending a notice, however, there are some steps that should be taken by the landlord. The first step to send out a notice to remove pets is to find out if you can legally do so. There are some cases where the landlord does not have the power to remove the pet, much of which depends on the following questions. Is there a no pet policy included in the lease agreement? Since the agreement is the document that both parties have signed, everyone is legally obligated to follow the terms. The lease should specifically state if the property is a pet-friendly rental or not. If the lease has no mention of a pet policy, it can get a little tricky for the landlord. The landlord can still request that the pet be removed, but will probably receive some resistance from the tenant. However, if there is a specific policy regarding unauthorized pets, the process is much easier. Along with the pet policy, there should also be consequences of a tenant having a pet. This is usually a fine followed by removal of the pet. But if the tenant does not remove the unauthorized pet, it could lead to an eviction. If there is a no pet policy included in the lease agreement, the landlord can move on to the next step, confirming the unauthorized pet lease violation. Since landlords can find out about unauthorized pets in many ways, like neighbors complaining, it is important that they confirm that it is true. There are some cases in which the tenant may have had a pet in the property, but they're not living with the pet. For example, a tenant may have had a guest over that brought a pet, and the neighbors were referring to this occasion. In this case, it is important that you do not accuse the tenant outright of a lease violation and issue a notice to remove pets. Because if you wrongly accuse a tenant of something, it could lead to trouble in the future. To encourage your tenants to not house pets on the property, you can let them know that routine inspections are conducted every few months. This way, the tenants know that the landlord will be routinely checking in on the property and will defer from keeping an unauthorized pet. Finally, you want to make sure that the tenant is actually aware of the policy against having pets. There's a big difference between someone blatantly going against the terms and someone making an honest mistake. However, if it is clear that the tenant knew about the anti-pet policy, reasonable accommodations are less likely to occur. Another case could be that pets are allowed in the rental unit, but the tenant must pay some sort of pet rent. This could either be in one payment, a pet deposit, or every month as a monthly pet fee. The way that it is charged depends solely on the lease agreement. So, before jumping into the writing of the letter, let's go over some restrictions of the no pet policy. No pet policy restrictions. Although it seems like the lease agreement presides over everything, it is actually the local and state landlord-tenant laws that govern mostly everything. Therefore, there are some exceptions laid out by the law to protect certain pet owners. Let's go over some of these exceptions, as well as how to accommodate these tenants. Service animals. Under the Fair Housing Act, tenants are actually allowed to request a certain level of accommodation from the landlord. Part of this includes being able to have a service animal on the property. However, the characteristics of a service animal are clearly defined by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Basically, a service animal is any animal that directly benefits any person with a disability. This could be physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or any other disability. They also specify that it must be a dog and that the service it provides must be directly related to the individual disability. Another class of of animals that have to be accommodated is emotional support animals. This kind of animal does not perform any kind of task or service. Instead, emotional support animals are supposed to aid people with emotional, neurological, or cognitive disabilities. These could include things like interrupting destructive behavior, reminding a person to take their medication, or calming a person having a panic attack. In these cases, the landlord is obligated by law to accommodate the tenant. So, if the tenant does not fit under any of these exceptions, they can receive a notice to remove the pet. Having an unauthorized pet on the lease premises places the tenant in a breach of contract, meaning that a notice should be sent. If you'd like access to your very own notice to tenant to remove pets, just visit the link in the description with DoorLoop's resources page. There, you can find this template as well as various other templates to help you out in every aspect in the real estate world.